Now it's that time of the year again where teams get desperate, they start to panic or start to plotting and making some trades. The deadline is right around the corner, February 6th to be precise, which is roughly a week and a half away. And of course, with it being this close, there are several, and I do mean several rumors that have been circulating around the NBA world. So in this video, we're going to talk about players that have been rumored for realistic trades that could be moved in the next week and a half. And we're also going to get a little bit wonky and crazy, or at least me explaining why some of these other players more than likely won't be moved at all. But first, let's stay grounded in reality and talk about realistic trades. First, we have the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, for those who have not been keeping up, the Lakers have had a really big shift towards the middle part of the first half of the season that has really transformed who they are defensively, while also keeping a lot of their offensive identity as well. A huge reason for this is the development of Max Christie, the D'Angelo Russell trade that happened about a couple of weeks ago when they traded D'Lo to the Nets and in return received Dorian Finney-Smith, and he has been really great alongside the team. And Jared Vanderbilt has finally made his return. Even though it's only been 2 games, it's still undeniable the type of impact that he's going to have on the defensive side of the floor for the remainder part of this season as long as he can stay healthy. And because of this, the Lakers find themselves with a respectable record of 26-18, which is 15th in the Western Conference. And even though the numbers across the board really don't do it justice on how good they've been, trust me, as of late, it's been a complete 180 on what this team has looked like on the defensive side of the floor, but they can still get better. Over the past couple of days, Anthony Davis has been on a media tour where he's made it very clear and been stern on the idea of playing alongside a 5, a center that will allow him to roam a little bit more, switch on a perimeter without giving up too much because there will be somebody playing backline. He even made references on how this team used to be built like this back in 2020 and 2021, which are the 2 most successful seasons that you could argue within the AD and LeBron era. And I do believe 2021 would have been much more successful if Anthony Davis had stayed healthy. So because of this, they want to add more to their defensive integrity. With the addition of a center, it feels as if like that could be the final piece to really put the Lakers into true title contention conversations. And to be honest with you, I'm a Laker fan and I don't necessarily believe that, but it does feel as if like this team is at least 1 or 2 moves away from taking that next step to be taken much more serious in a very competitive Western Conference. And I do believe adding a 5 to this roster certainly helps that tremendously. And this is a conversation that's been going on since the summer. Now, back then, the conversation centered around players such as Nikola Vucevic, Jonas Valanciunas, and even some rumbles of Jakob Poeltl. However, as time has progressed, it doesn't seem as if like those are going to be the best fits. And in particular, just this past couple of days, there's been breaking news that potentially Miles Turner could be on the chopping block out in Indiana due to the potential refusal of the Pacers handing out a $30 million a year contract to their starting 5, which in my opinion really does make things really interesting for the Lakers. Because the biggest problem for a lot of the other selections out there to play alongside Anthony Davis is that normally, even though they may be a good fit for him defensively, like a Jakob Poeltl, doesn't really add too much on the offensive side of the floor, and then other selections are effectively the inverse, such as a Nikola Vucevic. Great fit alongside AD offensively, but really bad on the defensive side of the floor. But Miles Turner addresses both of those concerns, allows AD to kind of roam around, still give rim protection, and being a really great fit alongside AD offensively due to Miles Turner 3-point shooting. And so because of the rumor that is now circling around, I thought of this trade. The Lakers would get Miles Turner, the Indiana Pacers would get Nick Claxton, while the Brooklyn Nets would get Rui Hachimura, Isaiah Jackson from Indiana, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Christian Wood, and a 2029 first-round pick. Which in my opinion is a pretty good deal if you ask me. Everyone wins, they get a lot of what they're asking for while also providing a lot of answers for the Lakers as well. The Brooklyn Nets get cap flexibility because Nick Claxton is under contract for 4 years. They're trying to rebuild. Making that type of commitment to a center that is not part of the process long term doesn't really make any sense, as well as them getting a draft pick in the process as well. Then when it comes to the Indiana Pacers, they get a serviceable starting big man who is, though making $27.5 million this year, is on a regressive contract, meaning that every single year he's making less and less money. This year it's again around 27.5. Next year it's around 25. The year after that, 23. And his last year, he's making 20.9 million. The reason why that's very important that his contract regresses is not only because the Pacers are already pushing up against the luxury tax bill and potentially even pushing up the idea of getting into the second tax apron, because right now, going into next season, with Miles Turner coming off of the books, they already have $167 million committed to their roster. Then after after that, with Miles Turner again coming off the books, and then Bennedict Mathurin also coming off the books as well, they'll have $170 million. So in this transaction, they get a starting caliber big, keeps their defensive identity, will not be the same three-point shooter, obviously, but still a lob threat as well, while giving them some cap flexibility as time progresses, because they'll be able to retain talent while going down on Claxton's contract to go on to sign Bennedict Mathurin long-term as well, because they have to also retain him. And then finally, you have the Lakers getting Miles Turner. The only thing that I might question when it comes to the Lakers is the level of commitment that they're willing to make. However, I would go as far as to say, with LeBron towards the tail end of his career, if they have to go into the second tax apron for a year or two, in my opinion, it will certainly be worth it. But in a much bigger picture here, adding someone like Miles Turner alongside Anthony Davis makes sense long-term, because I think he's a perfect fit alongside AD. The only other player I think fits well in this type of role with AD, especially if his shot isn't falling consistently, is someone like Brook Lopez, but Brook is like 36, 37 years old, so that's not going to make any sense. Miles Turner is perfect for AD. It's a long-term fix as well, and it is something that I've always wanted. Back when we were trying to trade for Russell Westbrook, I was like, no. Get us Miles Turner, and it'll make all the sense in the world. Now, moving on to another Western Conference team, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves, and as we all know, this season's been a lot of ups and downs. Despite the fact that Minnesota last year surprised a lot of people in the NBA world, made a deep postseason run, found themselves in the conference finals, this year has been fairly underwhelming. I talked about this in a previous video, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I'm pretty sure you all know, as I record this video, the Timberwolves find themselves in the play-in conversation in a very competitive Western Conference, and a huge reason for this is because offensively, it just ain't hitting, especially because Julius Randle just is not impacting this team and what they need in particular in terms of floor spacing, while also kind of keeping the ball moving, and also somehow is a worse defender than Towns was last year as well, which is very head-scratching. Because of this, there of course is going to be some conversation on how can they make an improvement on this roster without making any steep financial commitments. And in my opinion, the best way to kind of get out of this Julius Randle experiment, which I never believed was going to be a long-term fix anyway, is to go ahead and send Julius Randle over to the Utah Jazz, potentially send them a pick as well, and in return receive John Collins. Now, I get it. Going from Karl Anthony Towns to John Collins, that's a yikes, but that's something that we kind of all knew that Minnesota was going to have to do anyway. We already knew that because of the amount of money that they gave to Karl Anthony Towns, that they were never going to make any long-term commitments to a core that featured Towns, Gobert, and Anthony Edwards, because down the pipeline, they still have to pay Naz Reid and Nickeil Walker-Alexander, which are contracts that are coming up as soon as this upcoming summer. And because of the future commitments that they know they're going to have to make, that was the reason why they pivoted off of Towns to receive Julius Randle to potentially receive some cap flexibility while also retaining some type of competitive nature behind the transaction as well. But that just doesn't happen whatsoever. I do believe that moving off of Randle, bringing in another power forward at the same height and size, who is a much better three-point shooter, and more importantly, more willing to take a pay cut or take less money than Collins is making right now, because John Collins is making around $26 million. I do believe when his contract is up, he'll take less money, which will then give them the financial flexibility to retain Nickeil and Naz Reid for long term, and that right there is the bigger picture that they need to be doing anyway. And then Utah is Utah. They just want flexible contracts and as much draft compensation as they probably can receive. That's really a no-brainer. Now, those are some of the more realistic trades, realistic players that maybe moved around. Maybe not now, hopefully later on, but that's that. Now, let's go into the unrealistic trades that have been really grabbing the headlines, and I just need to give you all some updates on some of these players. First things first, Bradley Beal is not being traded. I'm sorry this here to tell you, let me go get a cat out of the bag. Bradley Beal not getting traded. The Athletic just broke a news report yesterday. Phoenix Suns guard Bradley Beal will not waive his no trade clause to go to the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls have been mentioned as one team that the Suns could use to facilitate a hypothetical trade for Miami Heat star Jimmy Butler. That is a lot and very alarming. So first, Bradley Beal, for those who may not be aware, but I'm pretty sure a lot of you are, of course, on a no trade clause, which basically just means that he has to waive a clause for the Suns to ever move him to a team, effectively meaning that he has to agree to whatever team he gets traded to. And in his trade, he says that he is not willing to go to Chicago Bulls at all. Now, what does that mean? Well, an already complicated trade became even more complicated because now we know where Bradley Beal is not willing to go, and that already kind of lessens the opportunities for other players to be moved, such as Zach LaVine and Jimmy Butler. But what does that mean big picture for the Phoenix Suns? Well, more than likely that means that you're probably going to have let's stay packed. Whatever the roster looks like now is more than likely what it's going to look like moving forward. And it's not just because of Bradley Beal's unwillingness to, but also teams around the league don't want Bradley Beal either. At this point, he is a third option. Even if you put him on a team to make him a second option, he's still not going to be that good. So regardless of where he goes, he will be a third option. With the amount of money he's getting paid, as well as him having these type of contingencies on his contract, it practically makes him unmovable regardless of where he goes. And so at that point, it's just really, really hard to move Beal. But I don't think that's ever going to happen because, again, Bradley Beal has to agree on that transaction. Now, Jimmy, we talked about this ad nauseum, and I'm going to continue to stand firm on this idea that I don't think he's going to be traded. Yes, I know there has been more and more news being broken about Jimmy not showing up or leaving practice early, being upset, suspensions, all those things. The reason why I've avoided reporting on it because I just believe it's a bunch of noise that's going to result in him staying in Miami. The type of money he's getting paid and the level of commitment that whatever team trades for him is going to have to make long term already makes it very difficult to move Jimmy. Not impossible, but just really, really difficult. But and on top of all the other shenanigans, I just don't see how Jimmy Butler is that desirable of an asset at all. And then you add on his age and a whole bunch of other stuff. I just don't see it at all. But then we have Zach LaVine. I said this before the season began, that there was going to be a lot of teams that were going to regret not trading for LaVine during the offseason when the Bulls were just begging for anyone to take him. And it seems like we're already there now. LaVine is playing amazing. He is easily, in my opinion, one of the top 25 players in the NBA like I projected him to be before the season began. He's putting up great numbers. I talked about this in my last video with the Warriors. He's exactly what a lot of teams need, in particular Golden State. But at this point, middle of the season, his trade value has now increased. And so it's not where we are before. Yesterday's price ain't today's price. He's playing better. And so Chicago, rightfully so, is going to be demanding more out of any transaction. Personally speaking, I believe that a team like the Warriors should still make a trade for him. However, I do believe it's been very interesting that a lot of the noise around Zach LaVine has been radio silence. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Chicago is probably just going to stay packed for another year to try to figure out what they can get out of Zach LaVine during the offseason, because it may just be easier to move him then when there's a little bit more cap flexibility with some of these teams. So that's another thing. And finally, moving on to a couple other names just quickly that you should really keep your eye on. First, we have Ingram out in New Orleans, where the Pelicans have found themselves in a very peculiar situation. His entire season was supposed to be them finding out the true value of Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, but bro, they've been dealing with injuries all season long. Trey Murphy, in my opinion, has really stepped up into that role, and it may give them even more reasonings to move on from Brandon Ingram. Herb Jones just hasn't done that at all. Same with DeJounte Murray, and then Zion is just missing games also. And so, despite the fact that Ingram has also found himself missing a lot of games as well throughout the season, his value really hasn't changed too much because they still need him to play games because nobody else is really playing games. So that's very interesting. And I also kind of wonder where his value is for the rest of the market, because him missing this amount of games certainly isn't improving him in those regards. Then you have Nikola Vucevic out in Chicago. Solid contract, a lot of buzz around his name, but terrible defender, so I don't know how much interest there is going to be out there for him. Similar things with Jonas Valanciunas out in Washington. Really good contract, flexible as well, but terrible defender. Who knows? Jakob Poeltl apparently isn't necessarily on the trade market unless the right price. And similar things is probably going to be true about Walker Kessler as well out in Utah. A lot of buzz surrounding Kessler's name really for the past like 6 to 8 months now, but I do believe there's a lot of interest to his name, especially what he provides to a team defensively. And a couple other interesting names. Lonzo comes to mind, $20 million coming off the books, expiring contract, but still hasn't played to a certain level. I do believe a couple of teams might be willing to take that gamble, but it's a very risky gamble. Ben Simmons also comes to mind as well, because just quick sidebar, I have no idea what's going to happen to Ben Simmons in his career after this contract is done. That's going to be very, very interesting. And then you also have Jeremy Grant and Rob Williams out in Portland, two players that have been in constant conversations. I think Jeremy Grant, his trade value has really dropped, played way too much losing basketball to get a true indication on who he is as a player, and also just isn't having that great of a season. And Rob Williams is always going to be a major, and I do mean major, gamble for a player that is constantly injured. So there's that as well. But hey, what do I know, man? All these players could be traded. We could see major changes in the NBA landscape in the next couple of days, and I would definitely love it because I'll be just churning out those videos. And so if that does happen, make sure you hit the subscribe button, notification bell to be updated when I upload on this channel. And until then, I'll see you all later. Peace.